Hi, it's Yaniv. Just a quick note to say that this is a sponsor showcase episode in collaboration with our longtime partner, Vanta. We handpick our sponsors based on the value we believe they can add to your startup. So it's an absolute pleasure to bring you this deep dive into the what, how, and why of Vanta from our recent live event with them. After listening to this, it will be clearer than ever why Vanta is a good idea for so many startups, probably including yours. Thank them for their generosity to the podcast and earn yourself a sweet $1,000 discount off Vanta by learning more at vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a sponsor showcase, a deep dive conversation into one of the incredible companies that support the Startup Podcast and the entire startup ecosystem. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll get the inside story about how our sponsors can support your business and accelerate your success. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Rob White.
And I'm Nathan Miller.
And welcome to this special live episode of the Startup Podcast, brought to you by our longtime sponsors Vanta and hosted here at Fishburners in central Sydney. So my name's Yaniv Bernstein. My background is as a software engineer, a tech executive, and then turned into a founder, angel investor, and advisor, and most recently, a podcast host. Today, we really wanted to talk to you about security and compliance. Like I said, I've been a founder before, and I've always found security to be a little bit like eating your vegetables, right? You know it's good for you, you know it's important, you know it's the right thing to do for your customers and your users. But you know what? You've got so many other things to do. You don't have much time or money. You're just going to eat the ramen and hope that negative health effects are going to be far enough in the future that you don't have to worry about them. Obviously, that's not ideal. So what if I told you there was a way to massively reduce the cost and the effort behind security and compliance? And not only that, but to turn that effort from a pure cost center, from a pure thing that you just need to do the right thing, into an actual profit center, into a source of business growth. So there is a way of doing that, and that way is Vanta. Here to talk through what that means and how it actually works are two very qualified guests, users of Vanta. So we have Nathan Miller, responsible for security and compliance at fast-growing scale-up Dovetail. And we have Rob White, who is responsible for risk and compliance at one of Australia's leading venture capital firms, Airtree. So welcome to the two of you. Rob, maybe you could give us a brief introduction about what you do.
Thanks for having me on, Yaniv. I look after risk and compliance at Airtree, one of the country's leading VC firms. We have over 100 companies in our portfolio. We back early stage companies, so pre-seed, seed, and Series A companies. Prior to Airtree, I worked at Superhero, the superannuation and trading fintech. So yeah, I have kind of experience on the VC side, but also on the startup side, and looking forward to give my input into how Vanta has helped us kind of accelerate our security and compliance.
Yeah, so I'm Nathan. I work at a company called Dovetail. So we're a user research platform. I've been there for about 3 years. I think most of my career, I look after a lot of their security and compliance. But most of my career, I've sort of worked in that Series A, B2B, SaaS type company. So safety culture, I was there for a while, and also deputy, to name a few. But yeah, thanks for having me. I'm keen to share my input.
Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome to both of you. Rob, I'll start with you. So you've been through this twice now, this sort of security and compliance journey. One of the things when we were talking ahead of this interview was you mentioned that it's important to get your head around this early on. So tell us a bit about your experience there and why it's important to not wait too long.
Yeah, so I think traditionally startups, early stage companies tend to neglect security and compliance, as you mentioned, Yaniv. It's something that kind of is neglected in pursuit of that high growth at a startup. And I think, yeah, it's really important to understand your obligations, understand your risks that you face as a startup. The main reason for that is to avoid headaches down the line. It's an obvious statement, but if you can understand your obligations, understand what risks you face from a security perspective at an early stage, you can avoid the problems, the incidents, the data breaches down the line. You can scale your security posture way easier than kind of scrambling at the last minute when an incident actually does happen. So the message that I would give at the kind of forefront of this conversation is just understand the obligations and security risks that you do face. And yeah, I think Vanta has helped us do that from the security perspective.
Absolutely. And one of the things that occurs to me, I talk about technical debt quite a lot on the podcast. And one of the things with technical debt is there's good technical debt where it's like I'm making a deliberate choice to do something, take a shortcut now, and I know I'll have to pay it back in the future. And there's bad technical debt, which is when you're just racking it up for no good reason. And one of the things with security is that there are often ways of building your software in a way that's secure or in a way that's insecure. And I think it's really important to have that in your mind. So even if early on you might make a couple of compromises, you want to make them wisely. It's important because the other thing with security is it's one of those things where if something goes wrong, it can go really badly wrong. It can kill your startup. It can kill your company. And so you can never reduce that risk to zero, but you should be thinking from pretty early on, how do I do this and help myself sleep better at night and really do the right thing? Customers are trusting you. So I think that's a really important reason to do it early. Nathan, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Like it's a lot easier just to say, we'll do it later. We'll do this later when we're bigger, we're making more money. But it becomes a lot harder if you sort of have that as an afterthought. And it's all okay until it goes bad. And then that becomes too late to think about security. But at the same time, I totally get that it can be quite difficult to make the trade-off of like, oh, I want to build a new feature. Why would I have to spend time on investing in security? I think just the risk of it, of not doing it is too high now. And there's so many tools that you can just plug and play to really bump your security posture.
One of the things we're here to talk about today is Vanta. And for those of you who are regular podcast listeners, not just to our podcast, but to podcasts in general in the startup space, will know that Vanta are actually a really major supporter of many podcasts, which is wonderful. And so I've heard the ads heaps of times. Maybe you have too. But I think one of the questions is, what exactly is Vanta and how does it work? How does it actually work to implement it?
The guys from Vanta will probably cringe at me giving this explanation, but there's a bunch of regulatory frameworks and standards that kind of guide IT compliance. And Vanta is essentially a platform that you can use to achieve certifications in those IT compliance frameworks, such as ISO 27001, SOC 2. There's 25 to 30 different frameworks on the platform that you can decide to pursue. And essentially how it works is you can integrate your existing systems into Vanta and you can manage your controls. So your processes, your policies, your kind of systems through Vanta. Instead of traditionally, you would have had to manually review all your controls on spreadsheets and different parts of the business. So basically Vanta is a way to kind of amalgamate all your IT security controls in one place. And yeah, those integrations are pretty effective because they tell you when a control is falling out of compliance with that particular standard. So for example, if a part of your cloud infrastructure is falling out of compliance, it pings you, it lets you know, and you can then remediate that straight away. So it's a really effective tool for a business that may not have the resources to monitor their controls manually and have the team behind the kind of IT infrastructure that's needed. So yeah, Vanta has helped me on 2 occasions manage those kind of security controls as a 1 or 2 person team.
I think that's great. And I'd love to go into some more examples because I think, again, there are the compliance frameworks and we'll come back to those and why those are important in a moment. But one of the things that Vanta does is it saves you a lot of time. So it's one thing to say, well, great, like this is a place where you can manage those controls, but it's actually not just a platform for managing this stuff, it accelerates them. And I think one of the things that doesn't come through in a short form advertisement is the how. Like, how does it accelerate that? So maybe Nathan, like I know you mentioned before, the amount of labor that's saved.
I view Vanta as like 2 employees. It just saves you so much time. So yeah, as Rob said, you've got all the compliance controls and tracking those, and then monitoring all aspects of your business to make sure that you're compliant with those controls. But there's other things as well, like they've got a questionnaire product. So part of my role, I get a lot of questionnaires from enterprise companies that we try selling. Yeah, they've got like an AI tool that just looks at all our documents and answers a bunch of those questions really easily. Saves me so much time. Another example is the Trust Center. I think that saves a huge amount of time having that procured really well, where it helps those self-serve customers get everything they need to buy your product.
Could you explain what the Trust Center is and how it helps?
The Trust Center it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a publicly hosted page that you have, and you can put all your compliance and security posture information on that trust page. So things like your data sub-processes, things like your SOC 2 report, your pen test, and then a customer can request access. You can even set it up with an NDA, so they have to accept that NDA before they can download that. You can even, if you're using a CRM, so we're using Salesforce, we're big enough for that, and you can even have it auto approve. So they're a customer or they're a lead, we automatically approve it so they get access to our SOC 2. Just speeds up that process so much. Before that, they would talk to our account rep would talk to me. I'd be like, have they signed an NDA? I would go, yes, and then I would download it, and then their account rep would probably give the wrong SOC 2 report. So yeah, just things like that saves so much time, so much back and forth, that whole self-serve aspect for the Trust Center.
So Vanta is about security and compliance. And security is something you do for your customers and for your users, absolutely. But compliance is the bit where you actually prove that you are doing those things. And you can't have compliance without security, but actually going from a position of being actually secure to being able to prove it can be a huge amount of work. And so I guess that there's two things here is like, first of all, how does Vanta accelerate it? But also I know, having been in regulated industries at Superhero, Rob, or working with very large customers, Nathan, at Dovetail, is quite often this compliance is a real supercharge or even an absolute necessity to growing the business.
Yeah, so for Dovetail, I kind of look at our SOC 2 compliance, and we're going through our ISO 27001 as like a license to sell. The sort of data that Dovetail processes, we just wouldn't be able to operate as a business. And Vanta really helps with that, because pre-Vanta, when we would do a SOC 2 audit, it would take 3 senior people, 14 hours each, to sort of compile all that info, send it off to our auditors. The last one we did, I think it took just myself 4 hours at audit time. So it saves me a lot of time, but then that means I can focus on other things. And then our customers, we're not really jeopardizing that SOC 2 report, which for us is definitely a license to sell.
And how about you, Rob, like in your experience at Superhero and also now at Airtree, what's the importance of compliance there?
In a similar vein, while we don't have as many customers as Dovetail, we still do have those clients and those LPs who expect that kind of compliance and that security around the data that we're holding. So from an Airtree perspective, they expect us to have a competent security posture, and it's something that's really important for us from an investor perspective. And then at Superhero, we would have had the same kind of similar size customer base. And again, it's just about expectations that when they're sending you their sensitive data, that you manage it in a way that's appropriate. And the use of Vanta helps accelerate that in a lot of ways. But I think the most effective way is that it's able to be used by 1 or 2 person team. So at Airtree, it's myself and we have an IT security manager. And at Superhero, it was myself and 1 or 2 others on the team. So I kind of mentioned earlier, traditionally it would have taken a full team of 5 to 10 people to achieve certification, like in a compliance certification. But with Vanta, you can scale back and apply resources that would have been used for a certification elsewhere in the business.
So, it's funny. I was Chief Operating Officer at Airtasker when we went through our IPO, and going public is very much a compliance exercise. And in my background as an engineer, I found it incredibly frustrating, right? Which is the whole amounts of effort we're going into not actually improving security, but simply to demonstrating that you can improve security. And to me, it felt like I understood the necessity, but it was very wide ranging, and it drove me nuts. It's like, let's put together all of these documents and policies and reports and audits. And it was incredibly frustrating because I felt this wasn't adding value to the business in a sort of a concrete sense. And it wasn't something that was actually enhancing security. It was just this process of proving something. And I think to my engineering mind that felt frustrating. And I think that's one of the things that we talk about with Vanta is it takes away or it automates a lot of that stuff so that it, the way I nearly view it is it narrows the gap between doing the right thing and being able to prove that you're doing the right thing. I don't know if either of you would be interested in responding to that.
Vanta collates all that evidence over. So for SOC 2, for a type 2, you need to prove that you've been compliant for the whole past year. And yeah, Vanta definitely collates all that information, stores it for you. You keep on top of it. I have like a 2-hour block in my calendar on Monday morning. I call it Vanta Health. I make sure that we're passing all the tests or any tests that are coming up So you're keeping that, but then when the order that comes, it's just so easy to prove. They have like a order the specific login, you grant access, and they do their thing, and it's proving it is so easy.
I also think, though, while it's nice to have the audit box ticked, it also is best practice. So, like, while you're achieving certification in a particular standard, you actually are managing your controls effectively, and you are preventing a potential security incident. So there's kind of two elements to it. There's we're ticking the audit box, but we're also fulfilling what we need to fulfill from a security perspective.
I think that's so important, right? Like when we talk about security and compliance, there's this concept of security theater, which is like taking your shoes off at the airport, which is like you do things in the name of security to show that you care about security, but you're not actually making things more secure. But I think what's great here is, first of all, that these frameworks, while they can be quite cumbersome and heavyweight, something like SOC 2 or ISO 27001, exactly to your point, Rob, these are not security theater. They are really showing that you are following those security best practices. So security and compliance are two sides of the same coin. You want to do the security, so that there is value, I think, simply in using Vanta, and we were talking about it before the talk, to aggregate all the different aspects of what is security best practice into one place. So again, so you can sleep well at night as a founder, as a head of engineering, as a CISO, saying, I know that we are being good custodians of our customer data. But at the same time, you then don't have this massive heavy lift to go from that to being able to prove it and have that license to sell. Like, you've talked about license to sell, and I was thinking about driving licenses when you talked about that. Like, imagine if you learned to drive. You're a great driver. You could do it all. But then when it came time to get a license, you didn't just do a little driving test. No, you had to fill in days worth of paperwork and get an audit of your last 3 years of driving and so on. And like, you end up spending a month just proving that you can do the thing that you can already do. And I think that is what compliance often looks like without a tool like Vanta. And so I think, it is both a thing that makes sure that you can drive and then tells the world that you can. I wanted to talk maybe about integrations. And again, because I think the depth of what it takes to be compliant is difficult. And Nathan, before the talk, you were saying, that, well, hardly any business now is an island, right? Everybody is running on clouds, is pulling in from SaaS vendors and so on. And so your security surface, your compliance surface isn't just your own product, but it's all of those products. And, on the one hand, again, this is what you said, Nathan, is like when a company says, yes, we run on Amazon and Amazon is SOC 2 compliant, therefore we're SOC 2 compliant. Of course, that doesn't compute. But on the other hand, if you're doing everything right, but if you're integrating with a tool that lacks that compliance, you can actually have a pretty significant security hole there. And so one of the things I think that Vanta does really well is manage all of those integrations. And I was wondering, either or both of you, like, if you could just give us some examples of where this has been really valuable to you, maybe where it's saved you a lot of time, but also maybe where it has pointed out a serious vulnerability that existed in your product through a vulnerability in a vendor that you used.
Yeah, so Vanta has, I think, like, the whole value proposition to Vanta, other than what we've spoken about, is them integrating with many different parts of your business. I think they've got like over 200 integrations now. So it's crazy. And they just build them left, right, center. And you need that because when you are going through an audit or you're going through compliance, you want to be able to show as much as possible through Vanta without having to draw elements from elsewhere. But I think it's like the same from like a security perspective as well. Like, if you Dovetail, we're doing a pretty good job, but we aren't, enterprise level security in terms of we haven't got all the tools there to collate all those logs and all those vulnerabilities into one spot. And I think Vanta actually does a really good job out of nature of having all those integrations. Like, if you've got your vulnerabilities from GitHub Event Security, or you're using AWS Guard Duty, or you're using Inspector, just even like the best practice around your cloud config, which are linking up to compliance controls, it sort of puts those all in the one spot. So it's actually like a cheap and easy to set up sort of collator of all security events at a very basic level. And I think that having that single dashboard it's saved me multiple times. We will be better. We will probably invest in other tools eventually. But I think from like a early company size, that's been really beneficial. So you're not going into GitHub Event Security or AWS Inspector or Guard Duty to sort of find those things. They're all coming to that one spot.
Yeah. Very briefly, I'll just discuss one of the integrations that we found really useful at Airtree, and it's the vendor management integration. So vendor management and third-party risk management is very much under the microscope of regulators at the moment because of the data breaches that are occurring through third parties. And one of the integrations that Vanta has is it allows you to pull in all your SaaS vendors into one consolidated list. So it pulls from your MDMs, your single sign-ons. And for us, we were able to pull that list within a few hours and essentially see what services people are using across the business. And from that, we can assess where we're sending data to, what vendors we're using, and just basically manage the services that we're using more effectively, because previous to that, we were using spreadsheets, and it was a bit all over the place in terms of finding that one consolidated list. So now that we have our full list, we can manage them and we can follow up with vendors on a regular basis.
And when you need to procure a new vendor and you upload all their security documents, their compliance, Vanta, they came out with this early this year or late last year, and I was like, genius. They use AI just to get all the answers that you need to procure that vendor. So gone are the days of reading through reports and white papers to see what they do. You just upload it, wait 5 minutes, and done. Questions answered.
It was a real eye-opener to me just to realize, if you're dealing with sensitive information, so like PII, personally identifying information, and you start using the latest tools, like the latest marketing tools. So you pipe that data into Segment and it goes into Klaviyo and it goes here and there. And you realize that it's not just about you and your database and your cloud provider, but you have all of these other companies, all these other software stacks that you do not control that are keeping your customers' data for you. And it's one of those things where it's like, it can be tempting to say, well, maybe we shouldn't do that. I remember having arguments with my engineering team, and they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't use Klaviyo or whatever it is because, we're giving them too much data about our user. But the truth is, your competitors are using it, right? And so if you want to be able to use the latest technology, sleep well at night, and show your customers that you are doing the right thing, then it's so important to have this integration, right? Like, I think gone are the days where you're like, hey, if we're doing the right thing, we're good. You need to have this sort of unified view. And that's really a lot of work to do manually. And I think that's what's quite exciting about a tool like Vanta, is that it can do it for you. And of course, it creates the right incentive structure as well through the whole industry, because if your customers ask you to be compliant, then it means that your vendors need to be compliant as well. And so it sort of cascades through. And we've all been reading about data breaches and so on. Like, I'd say most of us have been affected, whether we know it or not, by data breaches. So this is in our interests, not just as leaders in business, but actually also as consumers, to make sure that this is done the right way.
Yeah, to touch on that, so from our perspective, type of data that we process, our customers will go, we're going to hold you to this standard for posture and compliance, security posture and compliance. We then need to turn to our data sub-processors, so those vendors that you were talking about, and hold them to the same standard at a minimum. And tools like that vendor management that Rob was talking about actually just make that so much easier.
Security and compliance is not just something for big enterprise companies, right? Like big corporations have always been able to do this because they've been able to deploy armies of people to manage their security and compliance. Now, I know, our friends at Vanta who'll be here afterwards to talk to you, like, they've talked about the fact that big clients, big business and government are increasingly interested in the extra speed that Vanta can give them. But it's something that as a startup founder, you can integrate pretty early on. Before I forget, I'd like everyone to know here in the audience and also listening to the Startup Podcast that Vanta have actually got a special offer for all of you. So if you go to vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast, you will actually get $1,000 off your Vanta offering should you take it up. So this is something, it's not like something that you need to wait until you're really huge, especially if you're working in an industry where that license to sell is important. This is something you should be thinking about and that you can think about from pretty early on.
You don't necessarily have to be pursuing that certification. You can still integrate Vanta into your business and have a kind of oversight of all your compliance controls. And then maybe in a year or two, you can think about achieving certification. But I think it's a really effective and powerful tool to see how you're kind of shaping up in terms of your security posture without kind of achieving that certification.
I would sort of say, achieve the certification as soon as you can. Part of my role is I look at the vendors our engineers want to buy. I work at a hip tech startup. They like buying the latest, craziest software that probably, I don't know, some of you guys are creating. I have said no to people that aren't meeting certain standards, right? It's a competitive advantage in my eyes, having that certification. If I had to pick between two tools and it came down to it, I'm going one with SOC 2. Easy.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, right? And it's a type of validation, it's a type of proof that you're a serious vendor, right? There are the customers who cannot use you unless you have compliance and certification. And there are customers who can make their own choices. They're smaller, they're in a less regulated industry. There will still be some proportion of them whose buyers, whoever they are, care about security. And this is a really easy way to just get ahead of your competitors. So I think that's really valuable. We want to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. Hopefully a bunch of you folks have questions. But before we get to that, though, I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to provide some advice, I think, to founders and to other folks who are looking to really improve their approach to security and compliance. Like what are the biggest lessons that you've taken out of it over your time implementing these things?
I'm just going to reiterate what I've said throughout the podcast. Setting the kind of tone and the culture from an early stage is critical. Implementing a framework, be it a basic framework, you might only identify 10 to 15 risks throughout the business with regards to information security, but identifying those critical risks from an early stage is really important, and setting kind of a tone within the business that you do face the risk of a data breach, that you do face the risk of a security incident is really important. For example, going back to the vendor management, a security scorecard survey from last year showed that 48% of data breaches within the tech sector came from a third-party data breach. So things like managing your vendors from an early stage means that you don't have to kind of scramble at a later stage to consolidate that list. If you can kind of build a process around managing vendors from an early stage, you don't have to do it at a later stage. So yeah, I think setting the tone and setting a culture from an early stage is really important.
I joined Dovetail, we're about 30 people, we're already SOC 2 compliant, and having that from such an early part of the business actually changes the way that certain people think about data and data privacy within the company. And it's not necessarily like, oh, we can't do that because we're SOC 2. It's more like, okay, we have to consider X, Y, and Z because data privacy means a lot to us and our customers mean a lot to us. I think like other bits of advice I'd sort of give, again, I think it's just what I just said before is like, I see a lot of this as a competitive advantage for your business, especially if you're sort of touching elements of PII or you're trying to sell to large companies. You won't be able to sell to large companies at all with some sort of compliance standard. And yeah, you don't necessarily need a team of security engineers or compliance experts to do this. For Dovetail, I moved into a full-time security role when we were about 70 employees. And at that whole time, it was just managed part-time by a few of us. And I think like a tool like Vanta made that actually possible while achieving what we needed.
I think that's so important because I know as a founder, I feel like a bit of a hypocrite here. I'll be honest. It can be so overwhelming when you are trying to build something from nothing. You have got a lot of things to worry about. And security can feel like one of those things that is just, sure, in theory, you want to do the right thing, but it can be so overwhelming and so expensive to do the right thing that it can be easy to just be like, not flagrantly cavalier, but to say, okay, this is tomorrow's problem to really get our hands around it. So what a tool like Vanta can do is it lowers that activation barrier. It allows you to pull back what you should be doing really from day one, because as soon as you have customers, you should be looking after their data. You should be looking after security. And it allows you to actually justify that investment because it's a smaller investment from much earlier on. And again, we're turning it from a headache into a profit center. So you actually benefit from it, but you're also doing the right thing. And if you're a founder listening and you're like, oh, I wish I could do more about security, but we're struggling to find product market fit. I think, at least going to vanta.com/TSP, booking a call with a sales rep and learning a little bit more about how you might be able to implement that in your organization or in your startup, it's worth thinking about and really trying to do the right thing that way.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think a nice way to start your compliance journey if you haven't begun is just writing policies and procedures and sending them out to employees and letting them know that there is a compliance culture there, that there's policies to abide by, especially in information security policy, things around password management, two-factor authentication, things like that, just to kind of make it a bit more concrete within the business, if you do go down the Vanta route, they give you a suite of policies that you can apply to your business that you can circulate to employees. That's another thing that we found very beneficial through Vanta, is that kind of suite of policies that we didn't have to think too hard. It's kind of a cookie cutter policy set that they give you, but you can tailor it to your own business. So you can ensure that the policy actually is applicable to the business and not just a policy that you're sending to staff that doesn't make sense. So
thanks for that advice. Both of you have a lot of lived experience building secure and compliant organizations. So that's really fantastic. We'd love to move on to some Q&A now.
Okay, so I'm really sorry if this is a really stupid question because I know nothing. Is the platform doing the security, or it's just doing the comms about security?
I'm not the most technical, but I know it's not doing the security for you.
It's not doing
No, you still have to plug your systems in. You still have to kind of make sure you're following the processes that the platform tells you to follow.
Okay.
It doesn't actually manage your security for you. You just plug in your systems and it tells you whether you're compliant or not.
Okay, I've got
I don't know
another
if you can
question.
provide more of a technical aspect on that.
You nailed it.
I would just say though, like it doesn't fix your security for you, but it allows you to surface those issues. So when you say, is it just communicating it? No, I think it's much more than just the security center or what's it called?
It's
Center.
The
alerting
trust
you.
center. It's about, you can plug a whole bunch of things in. It will tell you what's right, what's not, and it makes it much easier to fix those issues, but it won't fix them for you.
Okay, and so when you were talking before about, you're connected with Klaviyo, but you're giving it way too much data. So how does it not give the data to Klaviyo, or how does it block that data from going to Klaviyo? Did I mishear that?
No, so my example there was, doesn't do that, but what it can do is make sure that whatever integrations that data is flowing into are themselves compliant and secure.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because I think that's the issue is like,
So it's monitoring the APIs?
No, not quite. It's more of like a risk type thing. So when we want to onboard a new vendor, we actually put it through some sort of risk management. We give it a risk score based on what data it's touching. Can it integrate with our production systems or internal systems? And then if it's for us, if it's a high or a critical vendor, we're going to go in and we're going to just make sure, we're going to give it more attention from a security procurement perspective. We're going to make sure, are they SOC 2 compliant? Right? Have they got things like SSO, things like that? So it's not necessarily controlling that barrier. It's just a way where you can then collate all your vendors together and get a clear understanding of which ones you actually need to focus on.
Okay.
Yeah.
so to go back to my kind of lame driving analogy, it doesn't drive for you. It's not self-driving security, but what it does is it can make sure that you can drive and prove to the world that you can drive.
Last question. When you talk about it turning into a profit center, how does it do that?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us is like I said before, I at least 2 employees, Vanta saves me. So the trust center, having that as a self-serve so customers can get everything they need to purchase our products. Things around the questionnaire, I can turn around questionnaires a lot quicker. I can get people that haven't got the context to do the questionnaires. So it's built up that knowledge library there. And then again, just things like I don't need to spend weeks trying to get our SOC 2 audit, right? I can do other things and then, that's only a matter of hours. And then that is such a critical part to our business, that compliance, and ISO 27001 soon as well.
Yeah, I think that the point of compliance is it allows you to sell to customers who would otherwise not buy from you. And so that is where it becomes a profit center.
Oh, that's how. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
This is probably more of a question for you guys, but how does the pricing work?
How does the pricing work? A guest appearance? We have a guest appearance here by John O'Coleman,
Yeah,
who's the
I look
GM
after
of...
the Vanta region in APAC, so I can answer any kind of more specific questions. Pricing is really based on frameworks and headcount, right? So the vast majority of our Fishburners ecosystem is sitting in that 0 to 20 headcount. They typically lead out with ISO 27001 and or SOC 2, and then we price it accordingly, apply the associated discounts on top of that as well. So full disclosure, full transparency, getting a SOC 2 certification off the ground, which can take anywhere up to kind of 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the bandwidth you're willing to allocate, can be around that 10,000 USD mark. Included in that is the Trust Center as well, as a packaged offering as well.
But $1,000 off. If you go to vanta.com/TSP, I'm sure there's another question. There we go.
I'm just curious because obviously part of your role is to do the compliance as well. So, if you were to put a dollar figure on it for some of us who are going through the whole process, not just the Vanta, but time and a whole bunch of other add-ons, like what would you say those 2 main compliance things would cost?
I mean, to do outside of Vanta?
Well, I guess either or, because obviously Vanta doesn't do the security. So because I'm just saying this, so someone starting from scratch, the cost is not Vanta, it's Vanta plus whatever time, effort, energy it is to get.
It's definitely a lot more than what we pay for Vanta. Like in terms of the flip side of not having Vanta, that all those employees, I don't know I haven't really thought about it, but I think like going back to what does compliance mean for the business as well? Like, I don't know, 80% of our ARR, if we lost our SOC 2, like, yeah, it's so important.
In a very real sense, the answer is going to be it depends. And it's one of the reasons why we're talking about it's good to start early, right? Because if compliance is about proving that you have those security procedures in place and that your software is secure and whatnot, the cost of remediating the gaps is going to depend on how big the gaps are. And so I think, approaching this good security in mind from early on is going to make that overall cost quite a bit lower. Yeah,
cool. I guess naturally, like the obvious one, like antivirus, for example. If you don't have antivirus, you're going to have to go spend money on antivirus. And if you don't have ABC, you're going to have to go spend money on that. So just wondered if you had an idea of that.
You still need those systems, and you still need your antivirus. You still need all the kind of integrations that go into Vanta, but the cost effectiveness comes from the monitoring of your compliance posture. You don't have to do that manually like you would traditionally. At Airtree, we have myself and our IT security manager who kind of manage Vanta. Another kind of aspect that we haven't really spoke about is the actual audit itself. An external auditor can come into your Vanta profile and conduct the audit remotely. So that saves a lot of money and effort and time from an audit perspective when it comes time to actually achieve certification. So yeah, there's elements kind of within Vanta that save a lot of time and effort, but probably putting a dollar value on it is hard.
Yeah, like I said before we were using Vanta for our SOC 2, it would take 3 senior engineers, technical people, many hours. That dollar value opposed to, me spending 4 hours is, I think like multiples more than what we pay Vanta. So.
Yeah, cool. I just obviously turning into a profit center, and obviously, when your 80% of clients are requiring it, it makes perfect sense. I just, for some people that are on the fence and not too sure, they're going, well, what does it look like? And I know, like, ISO 27001, they're looking at, depending on how efficient they can and can't do it, and obviously using Vanta, could be, 20,000, but could up to be 100,000 plus, and obviously SOC 2 even higher again, because obviously it's significantly more.
Well, maybe that's a perfect segue. It's a good time to wrap it up and to let you all know that we do have a couple of folks here from Vanta who are going to stay back and would be happy to answer some more detailed questions and, see if it makes sense for your individual needs. Thanks very much for coming. And of course, if you go to vanta.com/TSP, you'll get how much money off? $1,000. Is that USD? American dollars off. That's like $1 million Australian dollars. So have a chat to the team and like this is a complex piece of work, but like these folks have said, it can save you a vast amount of money and unlock new markets while protecting your existing customers. So thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks so much to Rob and Nathan for sharing their experience, and thanks of course to Fishburners for hosting us, and to Vanta for sponsoring the Startup Podcast and sponsoring this event. We really appreciate it. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. To sell to the enterprise, proving security is essential. Vanta allows you to breeze your way through to SOC 2, ISO 27001, or Essential 8 compliance and unlock major growth for your company. Go to vanta.com/TSP today. That's vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to claim your $1,000 off.